it's you have psychological safety. Can you disagree with your manager and sort of not get in trouble? Can you have candid conversations? Do you get enough feedback about how well you're doing in your job, either sort of positive or constructive feedback?
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to MentorZ. Today we have on Santiago Jaramillo, the CEO and co-founder of Emplify. Emplify is a company on a mission. They strengthen the employee engagement and the culture of other businesses. And in the business world, in the leadership world, culture is everything. Engagement with your workers is everything. And in this episode, we're going to learn all about that. Guys, I can't wait. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to MentorZ. Today we have Santiago Jaramillo on, and I am so excited to have him on because he is a fantastic guest. I just looked into some of the things he's been doing. Previously, he's been in Inc. as 30 Under 30 World's Coolest Entrepreneurs. He's gone to the White House under the Obama administration for Champions for Change. And he's a serial entrepreneur. He has multiple companies he's started up, and right now I'm with him at Emplify. Thank you so much for coming onto my channel.
Absolutely, I'm happy to be on it, and really excited to catch some of the latest podcast episodes.
Thank you. So, can you please tell me a little bit about Emplify and employee engagement and mobile engagement?
Sure. Yeah. So at Emplify, we're on a mission to improve the lives of 1 million people through more meaningful work. The reality is that 70% of Americans go to work and they're really disengaged. That means that they don't like what they're doing, who they're doing it with, where they're doing it at. And the reality is we spend half of our lives working. When you sort of, after you graduate and you kind of end school and you enter the workplace, you spend a third of your life sleeping, basically. Most of us do, right? A third doing everything else, and then a third of it being work. And so work is this huge part of our lives, and what we believe is that work can actually be engaging. It can be motivating, it can be fulfilling, it can be mind expanding, it can be energizing, it can be this place that you look forward to going to because you get to do great work with good people, have mastery and autonomy over your craft, and really for work to not just be something that you do to get to the weekend, but rather as an integrated part of life that is part of why your life is wonderful and meaningful and fulfilling, is because you get to work and use these talents and skills. And so today, though, lots of folks are disengaged. And so what we want to do is we want to help change that. How we're doing that is we notice that most leaders and companies, who are really a lot of the ones that are making the decisions around what type of a work environment they have, whether it's a really awesome one, an engaging one, or or one that really disengages folks and makes people miserable, those leaders are seeking greater clarity in how to make decisions. How do they know what their team needs most to be more engaged? How do they know what the next best or most important thing that they could do to improve the life of an employee by creating a more engaging environment? So that our software essentially goes in and gets employee participation, does a survey on a quarterly basis, and then really tees up for leaders simple, trustworthy, and actionable employee engagement insights that help them know where to focus their time and effort to yield the most engagement increase, so that they can be able to create a more engaging environment. So that's what we're doing at Emplify.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. So when you're talking about an engaging environment, do you mean like, I'm not really into my work, I don't really want to work here, or is like I'm having trouble communicating with my other coworkers, I don't want to really talk to my boss, I'm a little afraid of him? What are all the components of having an engaging environment?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So through our research, we found really 17 factors. There's 3 psychological conditions and 14 drivers of employee engagement in our model that we found through the research that we've done around what creates an engaging environment, what creates employee engagement. It's all of the things that you mentioned. It is some things about company leadership, things like the authenticity of leadership, whether you believe that leaders are honest and kind of real with employees. It can be things like purpose. Do I believe that the company exists for something more than just making money, but it's making some sort of positive difference in the world? It could be fairness, or leaders making sort of fair and just decisions in the way that they treat employees. And so all of those are factors kind of at the leadership level. But it's not just leadership level. It's actually your manager is another sort of factor in engagement. And so it's you have psychological safety. Can you disagree with your manager and sort of not get in trouble? Can you have candid conversations? Do you get enough feedback about how well you're doing in your job, either sort of positive or constructive feedback? So we talked about kind of leadership at the highest level. Your direct manager has a huge influence on a person's engagement, and of course peers, right? In the environments, do people have shared values? Do I have somebody, friendship is another driver of engagement. Do I have somebody at work that I can talk to about a personal topic? All of these things sort of form this engaging environment, this employee engagement. And we define employee engagement as the emotional and intellectual connection that a person has with their work and with their employer. And so as you can imagine, that's like trying to measure love. It's just sort of this like really complex psychological condition. And so we look at 17 factors to be able to sort of assess that and really help leaders understand which one of these 17 is the thing that my team needs most this quarter.
That's so cool. So I feel like, are these all root problems? Because sometimes you'll have like overlying symptoms, right? And you have to dig down to the root. What do you see like as a lot of the roots of the problems? Is it the leadership level, is it management level, or is it like peer level? And
so it varies sort of across the board by industry. We see sometimes some of our research has uncovered that millennials, for example, as a generation, they desire greater amounts of purpose in their work than maybe other generations. So I think every generation is moving more toward that, but millennials seem to sort of have gotten there faster in terms of their value that they put toward the company purpose. And so, for example, for millennials, it might be that. Sometimes for other types of organizations, for example, organizations that have field workers, so a construction person out on the field that never talks to leadership, they might have an authenticity problem because they've literally never have seen the company leadership in person, because they're the company headquarters is in Indianapolis and they're in Oklahoma doing work. And so when you ask them, do you think that leaders in this company are authentic and real? They're like, I've never met them. I've never heard from them. And so I don't think that they're authentic because they don't take the time to get to know me and hear from them. So it really varies kind of across organizations. And many times what we find is disengagement is the root problem, and what leaders are experiencing is really heavy turnover or really bad productivity or absenteeism where people don't show up to work. Those are the symptoms, and then engagement would be kind of the root problem many times.
Oh, so you're hitting the root already.
Yeah.
I love that. So I'd never really even thought about the perspective thing of like, because I've always thought it in a company setting, right? Your boss is always in another room.
Yeah.
But when people are far away, I never thought about that.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of our focus, our niche. Is a lot of other sort of employee engagement insights or measurement companies are going after companies with white collar workers in office environments, and we think there's a really interesting problem to solve around those field-based folks that are working with their hands, that are skilled laborers and aren't in the office but are out in the field, construction site or somebody's home fixing their plumbing. Those are really interesting problems to solve because they're hard to reach since they're not at the office and not in front of a computer, and many times don't have like an email address from the company to be able to send a survey to them and get their feedback.
Yes. Have you ever tackled a problem like that? And if so, like, what has been a good way of solving it?
Sure. And so we immediately had to deliver. We realized that for some folks like that, they didn't have a corporate email address, and they just necessarily didn't check email that much. But what they did have was their smartphone. They carried their smartphone everywhere. And so we figured out that if we built a text message delivery system for the survey, that they would actually take so they would go back to their truck and get a text message from Emplify, and they would hit the link, and inside of their sort of smartphone browser in a mobile optimized way, they could fill the survey out. And before, they would literally either not ever get surveyed, or it would get sent to their email that they don't check, or they would literally have to be mailed a paper survey, fill it out with like pen or pencil, and then mail it back somewhere. And so participation rates were dismal, and they had fears that their handwriting, it could sort of they could be identified through that. Because obviously one really important part of this is making sure that the data is valid. Employees have to answer the survey honestly on how they're really doing, but if they don't believe their responses are truly anonymous or confidential, they're not going to answer honestly, because they sometimes feel like they have a lot more to lose than they have to gain by filling the survey out.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the worst parts of workplaces is that when you Simon Sinek, so the circle of safety, when that's violated internally, because you'll have the outside forces of anything else, and that's just the world in general, but when it comes to be internal, of like, my boss might fire me if I speak my own mind, that seems like such a root issue.
It is.
And that has to do so much with like the personality of the company, the personality of the brand. Like, how do you go about changing the leaders, or how do you go about going, your employees, they need this in order to feel safe.
Yeah.
How do you get that perspective shift from either like income or from money to people?
Sure. That's a fantastic question. So historically what's happened is that employee goes to HR, and then HR, human resources, then goes to goes to that leader if it even gets this far. And then they tell the leader, hey, your team is feeling like they can't be sort of psychologically safe and they can't disagree with you, et cetera, et cetera. And then the manager is like, that's a bunch of fluffy, subjective feeling stuff. Like, get out of here with that. I have a job to do, is many times the response. So maybe that wasn't so effective. A lot of the times the employee doesn't even have a channel by which to sort of express their fear of psychological safety, because by definition it's psychological safety, so they don't want to tell anybody because they're afraid they might get in trouble, right? And so for us, it's been providing the employee a tested, tried and true, proven, anonymous and confidential vehicle by which to be honest about their fear. And then number two, making sure that leaders understand that the data that we're showing them is trustworthy, like it's credible. We did our work around the science and the academics of how we're measuring it. And so this is data that you can't argue with. And so when we present a leader data that they can't argue with, that is trustworthy around how their leadership, the effect that it's causing is low psychological safety in their team, and by the way, that's way lower than compared to other managers, that all of a sudden gets personal for the leader, because now it's data they can't ignore. It's like putting a mirror in front of them or a cold splash of water to the face. It kind of wakes you up, because leaders and managers, data is really how is trustworthy data, showing them that, then they know that they have a problem. And if they don't even know that they have a problem, then there's very little chance that they're actually going to do anything to fix it.
Yeah, and it seems like when they don't know it's a problem, I feel like it's because they're much more of like a bigger company, much more vast. So how do you go about having those big companies, those big leaders on top, those CEOs, and go, your employees need help, and you go, well, I have thousands of employees. Mm-hmm. And I mean, does it have to trickle down to the managers, or is it something that you can change at the top that'll help trickle down to the bottom?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's a couple. So the quick answer is we give managers a login to see their own team. And so instead of just the CEO having access to this, it's every manager can see their own team and their engagement. The way that we make sure that it's anonymous and confidential is we never show scores for a group with less than 5 respondents, so that way the manager can kind of dig and zoom in into their team, but not ever tie somebody's identity with their responses, right? Which is what we never want to do, and we never allow. And so you're right. We do go all the way deep into an organization. I think our largest organization is 3,500 or so employees. That's kind of an outlier though. And so in that one, there's one sort of president, and then there's 18 chancellors. This is a university for different regions of the state. And so each of those chancellors have access to their own region, and those sub-managers have access to their own region. And so the CEO can see the roll-up of the whole thing, but the manager can then go really granular in their team.
The consistency of this of the tactical nature of this is so cool to me. You've really thought everything through to make sure it's anonymous and everyone's safe, and you can't. It makes sure that everyone is really comfortable in answering for honest feedback. That's so that thought process. How long did it take you to get through that process?
Thank you. All the credit goes to super smart people that work at Emplify. Really. So this is This is Todd Richardson, Brian Deo, and Megan McNames, our entire product and engineering team, our customer success team led by Joseph, that really have listened to employees about what they need to feel safe answering, have listened to leaders about what type of data they need that is going to be trustworthy and actionable for them, and then kind of created a solution based on customer feedback and sort of knowledge about what they need. And so we just really thoughtfully have asked our prospects, our market, and our customers really what they value and how we unlock that, and we've sort of only built the things that they have shared with us are really true from a first principles type level.
So these processes that you go through, big or small companies, how long does it take? Because I know that building trust in a relationship of any kind, or building that love or that friendliness takes months or years.
Yeah.
So how long do you have to work with a company?
Yeah, so it depends on the problem they're trying to solve. So some problems are super easy, they're kind of low hanging fruit, and you make one little change, and all of a sudden people's lives get a lot easier. So, for example, there was a welding team down in Alabama for a company called TH Marine, and they were the lowest team in terms of engagement, super disengaged. And they figured out that utilization driver was the lowest, which is like this company's using my skills and abilities in a way that makes sense. And so they dug into that through our software, and they found out that they needed to buy a forklift and a leveling table because these welders, instead of doing welding work, which is what they love doing, they were picking up heavy metal sheets all day, moving them from one place to another, and they had backaches, and it was super ineffective, and they were doing kind of work that minimum wage labor or a robot could do instead of doing like really skilled welding. So the company literally just invested 60 grand into a forklift and a leveling table like a month after. Next quarter they measured, and that team went from the lowest engaged team to the second highest engaged team, second only to the leadership team, and their productivity went up 30%. They can now, with the same team, produce $3.6 million more of product. And so for that one, that was like 60 days, buy two pieces of equipment, and all of a sudden engagement is significantly improved. So that's kind of an extreme example of like low-hanging fruit. You can do one thing and really make a huge difference. There's other things like purpose, where maybe a company doesn't have a noble purpose. Maybe for a while it's just all been about making money and making profit, and there's no sort of a lot of attention being put toward, well, how does what we really do? Yes, we get it that obviously making money is important and a way to sustain the business and have a healthy and well being of a company, but also people are now looking for sort of the company to do something better. For a leadership team and owners and founders to go through a process of discovering the purpose and articulating it in a compelling and authentic way, and then sharing that with employees, that's probably going to take more than 3 months, right? That may take 6 or 9 months, or a trust issue, right? Maybe trust was broken at some point, and it takes months or quarters of like consistent trustworthy behavior to get that back. And so depending on the problem, it ranges from like a day of easy fix all the way to a process that's going to take a year.
Well, either way, that's so cool. That success story one was amazing.
Thank you.
I feel like that's because you put passion into it, you put work into it, or like something that they love.
Mm-hmm.
And then with purpose, I feel like, because trust is hard, like is a long thing to fix,
mm-hmm.
but it is fixable.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not step by step, but there's a way to get to it. I feel like if a company doesn't have purpose, that's a really deep issue to solve, mm-hmm. especially millennials, that generation that really wants purpose and have that drive for it. Mm-hmm. The problem is with them, it's like they kind of want it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
You can't have it now. You can't
mm-hmm.
have it now. So does a company have to go through that? Like, you can't have purpose now. You can have purpose later. And then with this, with Generation Z, this new generation, we're starting to enter the workforce. Mm-hmm. What do you see any patterns with this new place that we need to fix problems now, or we need certain requirements now?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things is about millennials is that they've grown up in a world of technology, of instant everything, right? You can, before, every other generation had to like go and walk to Blockbuster and get a movie, right? And our generation, and especially Generation Z, never grown up in a world where something wasn't there at the touch of a button. And so there are different expectations that generations have around how instant things are going to happen, and that's an interesting challenge for many times it's Gen X or baby boomer generations that are in leadership of companies, right? Okay. And it's now entry level workers, their kids' age, that are coming into the workplace, and so it's quite a bit of a generational gap between sort of the people making the decisions and a majority of the entry level positions. And so I think it's something that the solution there is probably coming at it from both sides. Is baby boomer Gen Xers realizing that the world is changing, and if they want to be highly competitive and get the best talent of the new generation, that there's some things they're going to have to sort of disrupt themselves in their own way of doing things and move maybe a little bit faster than has been comfortable before. And then on the millennial Gen Z side, it's this realization that the workplace doesn't necessarily move as fast as consumer technology does, and everything isn't as instant. And while an expectation of a better world being there, it's many times maybe not realistic to demand that happen today, or that I've been working for 3 months, how have I not gotten a promotion? It's like, well, that's not necessarily how most workforces work. Maybe they should operate like that, but the reality is that that's not where we're at. So what can we do to move the world toward that more aspirational, better reality while still being cognizant of how it is today.
Yeah, I feel like that's so much like self-awareness and empathy on both sides.
Yeah.
In order for it to work, especially when it comes to bigger things like trust and purpose.
Yep. But the important thing is that those generations are talking, right, in a productive way. Because if the conversation, the discussion doesn't even happen, neither side even realizes what they could be doing to help fix the problem.
Yeah. Do you think that that's becoming more of an issue? That like baby boomers or like Generation Y, or is it X?
Gen Xers?
Yeah, yep. Gen Xers. Or do you think they're not really talking to millennials and to Gen Zers as much? Because I know we have this thing of like, why are millennials killing like the diamond industry or random things? And there's a disconnect of, well, here's the reason why. And there's this struggle, this gap. Do you think we're closing the gap, or do you think it's getting worse?
Interesting. So in many ways, the world is changing faster than ever before. And so new generations are growing up in a vastly different world, increasingly so than other generations. And so in some ways, I think that gap is somewhat inherently, if sort of change and innovation keeps accelerating, and I think fundamentally that gap has the risk of increasing over time. Hopefully, though, there's folks like us or other folks out there that are trying to help that feedback loop happen and sort of bring up the voice of those more entry-level folks, individual contributors, or the ones farthest away from a organizational hierarchy, from leadership making decisions, to bring their voice and elevate their voice in a clear way to leadership, and then be able to help leadership know how to communicate with those and sort of start having that flywheel actually start to happen. And so I think sort of the trends might make it so that that challenge might get harder, but hopefully technology and increasing maturity in leadership toward at least listening can counteract against those trends and actually help it improve. But boy, I sure hope it improves over time rather than not.
That's so cool, because like what's gonna happen is like once you get those conversations flowing on any level, you're gonna start seeing like really cool ideas come up and disruption, and you're gonna see like everything like newly reinventing itself. Yeah. Like I know right now, because my dad's in the educational system. There's already been like bubbling up of like, this is really dumb. Like this is really dumb. We should change some of these things. Yeah. And slowly, in a couple years, it's going to dramatically change. Like I feel like sometimes, and I don't know if you have this insight, like sometimes a whole system has to collapse and then rebuild itself. But I don't know if that's even smart for like a company and their entire workforce of like, no, we have to feel really bad and then build ourselves up from the ground up.
Sure. Yeah. The point is, avoid your company. For example, we switched from Bluebridge to Emplify, sort of the first company that we started with two other co-founders. Bluebridge evolved to Emplify, and there was a ton of organizational change that happened during the transition. And I was so busy with selling the two businesses at the same time of having my normal job that I didn't really change manage super well throughout that transition. And our engagement score, in terms of sort of the cultural health or the employee engagement at Bluebridge/Emplify, like we went down from like one of the most engaged cultures that the assessment had ever surveyed and measured to like really poor. And so for me, it was this realization that you can ruin your culture overnight, literally in the span of a couple of months, if you're not actively watching it. And what you want to avoid is, as a leader, is hitting sort of a roadblock like that really hard head on, and the company disappearing because of that. What you want to do is get ahead of those blind spots, get ahead of those issues so that you can avoid them, and it's a bruise instead of your arm getting chopped off, right? To use a really ridiculous extreme example.
No, of course.
And so I do think that if you're sort of continually monitoring it and measuring it, then you don't have to wait for the full thing to fall apart before you can start reinventing yourself.
So like how do you get ahead of that curve? How do you spot things before they happen? Yeah,
you have really continual feedback from your team that's really anonymous and by Emplify, right? Or another tool like that, right? But I mean, I'm sort of it's kind of see a nail and I hammer it into the wall because it's what we do. But I think it is having kind of a continual touch and pulse into the culture and into employee engagement, making sure that instead of measuring it annually or every 2 years, you're doing it quarterly or really frequently, so that you can get ahead of those issues before people leave. Instead of finding out where people are leaving at the exit interview, find out why people might leave, fix the problem so they never leave in the first place.
Yeah, and I love that, especially when you were that proactive and that helpful. I mean, honestly, a culture sounds much like a child. You gotta take care of it constantly, make sure it's doing well, or else you might get sick. It might crawl off somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. And the crazy part is that we have that for every side of the business. Like we, as leaders, and managers, we have metrics on like sales, productivity, and customer health and satisfaction and profit and cash flow. And we monitor those things not annually, not quarterly, but like we monitor them in real time because they matter. Yet that level of rigor of measurement and sensing and measurement hasn't really gotten operationalized for the people, culture, engagement side of the house, which is so important. And so why are we not applying that same rigor that we're applying to every other business metric to the people and culture and engagement side of the house?
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like it's because there was a while back, there was a shift of, let's take care of our people, and then we started to turn to money. Like, let's take care of money. And then after a while, you had this whole group of people that were like going off the deep end going, I can just get rid of my employees. It doesn't matter that much. And that huge shift created that big gap of, that personal connection with your boss or the personal connection with your employees, because you have to put your head down now and you have to work now. And if you don't make your quota, and if you don't, live up to these expectations of you on a daily basis, you're done.
Yeah. The interesting trend that I think is positive is we're in the most competitive talent market that we've seen. Like it's super easy to get a job, much more so than it has been in previous, since 2009 and sort of the financial crisis. The amount of time to fill a position has gone up from like 15 days to like 35, which is like a record, which means that there are lots of jobs out there, which means that people can freely go and get another job. And so voluntary turnover, people leaving and going to a better job is at its highest also in a while. And so when you look at those things, all of a sudden leaders are now saying, oh boy, like we've really got to invest into our culture and into engaging environments, because we're going to lose people, and it's really hard to find good people to replace them. And not only that, but there's websites like Glassdoor.com, right, that put employer brand and how leaders and companies treat employees publicly available. Like it's like a public review site that employees can go to and post reviews about the company. And so, savvy talents now, when they're looking for a job, they go to Glassdoor.com and they will only apply to places that are highly ranked. And so when you're not an engaging environment, a culture, in the past you could sort of hide that and that not be known. Now it's like publicly available on the internet, and so it's giving leaders a lot more reasons to care about this.
That's so cool. I didn't know that existed. That sounds, honestly, that if that's like such an eye opener for everyone, like that's going to disrupt so many systems.
It is.
And
so it's the same thing. It's the same thing that social media did to customer service, right? You could sort of really harm customers and treat them poorly before sort of the internet and social media, because you can only tell 2 or 3 people about a poor experience, and all of a sudden social media comes up, and then you can tell hundreds and thousands of your friends and followers about a bad experience with a brand, and all of a sudden brands are like, like this is really bad for our reputation, so we better actually start delivering good customer service. And so this transparent visibility of customer service online created an emphasis for brands to care more about customer service. And the same thing is happening for employees, which is this visible, transparent online employee experience rating websites are causing leaders to really pay a lot more attention. So I think that's a really positive thing. Transparency, I think, is generally good.
No, transparency, especially on that level, is a beautiful thing. Because if people only work for the companies that are amazing to their people, everything else is going to change, because every company's going to go, oh cuss, we have to be like them. So then it's going to have this huge, positive impact of everyone actually wanting to go to work. And everyone loving their job, and everyone loving their employees and their bosses. They probably wouldn't call them bosses at this point. Probably their leaders or tribe members, which I've heard once or twice.
Sure.
That's incredible. And we're running out of time because I know you got to get going. Where can people find you?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter, Santiago Jara, and on LinkedIn as well. So those are 2 great places to connect.
All right. Thank you again. Thank you so much for being on my podcast. It means the world to me, and your insight is incredible, and I hope people got as much from it as I did.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you like what we're doing, please help us grow by sharing our content. And if you have any recommendation for future guests, please email me at agwetrick@gmail.com.